Our first task as a group was to really understand the meaning of disaster, a word so widely used it's often hard to pinpoint its original use as a noun or adjective. As we all know, disaster is to describe a negative impact, and what we aim to do is show you how the world reacts to it in both positive and negative light. A case study which depicts disaster was a catastrophic failure at the Fukushima nuclear power plant on the 11th of March 2011, resulting in a meltdown of 3 of the plant's 6 nuclear reactors. An earthquake 100 kilometres off the coast of Japan triggered a 13-metre tsunami, which hit the power plant, causing explosions and the system meltdowns. The backup generators that were meant to run the cooling pumps for the reactor in an emergency were flooded. The reactors were shut down as soon as the quake hit, but it was later found that the core had melted through the containment. As the fuel leaked, it reacted with the cooling water, producing hydrogen, which triggered large explosions. These explosions scattered radioactive debris around the site and into the air. There were no immediate radiation fatalities, but 150,000 people were evacuated. But people outside the exclusion zone, up to 250 kilometres away, were starting to worry because of lack of information. Only 21 people have died in total, 7 who were in the first response due to the explosions, and 14 elderly residents have died from the evacuation process. No deaths have been officially recorded from the radiation itself, but people estimate 100 extra cancer deaths due to radiation, but the science community is divided, so this could be more or less. 1 year after the disaster, all but 2 of Japan's nuclear reactors have been shut down. Lots of questions are still unanswered. The government denied a meltdown initially, which has now proven to have happened very early on. Also, it was reported by a worker that the earthquake itself caused a burst pipe, which affected the cooling long before the tsunami.
Okay, so as Becky said, there are no immediate radiation deaths, apart from the increased cancer risk, but there's no evidence for this, so we don't know. It could be scare tactics. 150,000 people were evacuated on the first day, and 300,000 people in total. That figure remains at 80,000 people, so as you can imagine, across the country is having a massive impact, as well as in the radiation zone all around. The services are being stretched, and the radiation is now being said to have reached America, but again, it could just be scare tactics used by the media. Okay, so the event caused massive disruption across the world, and it's hard to see why they weren't prepared for it, because they had one of the biggest disasters the world has seen to learn from. So that's Chernobyl 25 years ago. Although Chernobyl was caused by human error, and Fukushima was caused by a tsunami, it's still showing how much of a risk there is with nuclear power, and is it valid to use this just to gain money? I mean, the power plant is built on 4 tectonic plates, and the safety should be the first thing to be considered. But it seems that they are putting the economy first, so they're trying to save trillions of dollars instead of putting the safety of people first. The text of the original disaster talks about the need to address the risk factors associated with future technologies, which we aren't really doing at the moment. And in not doing this, we're essentially creating a museum for the future disaster.
Yeah, the original accident speaks of disaster surrounding us in every day and looming over our present and future as the technology boom spirals out of control. Virilio speaks, the accident is what happens at one point in time, and from this, a gradual spread of events disperse across civilizations which affect reality of the moment and cause anxiety and anguish for generations to come, thus creating the disaster. The problems we face now is the fact that technology is advancing more than our human capability, and with both ideas not running in sync, disasters are imminent.
Another case study we found for alternative is the financial crash New York in 2007. This was not to do with the trigger of natural disaster, but an artificial trigger in the shape of money. The recession started with the US subprime mortgage crisis. It mostly blamed on the housing bubbles, which started around 2006, which meant that the home prices plummeted. Therefore, lots of investors started to take out loans, and banks started to give loans on less interest. There was even one time when the interest rate dropped an all-time low 0.00%. investors started to take loans from New York City banks and globally. The payback rates from individual loans were slow, and the negative chain reaction of money had started. This was not only a disaster for the financial district, but for the government as well. The recession was starting. Every bank was losing money at a huge rate. And in September 2008, the government allowed the bank Lehman Brothers to go bankrupt. The biggest bankruptcy in history of biggest bankruptcy in US history. The knock-on effect of this was loss of trust in banks and in the government, and people started to back out, and the banks dried up exchange between them. This graph shows the people who were affected. As you can see, it was everyone. In December 2007, the employment rate was 4.6%, but was double to a higher 9%, as the unemployment rate later increased from 10.5% to 15.5%. Hundreds of people lost their jobs from every sector, no matter how educated you were. To put this in a local example for you all, when the recession hit the UK, generally the people who had completed higher education and were in private sectors were more secure in their jobs. New York, no one was safe. The effect of this did not just lie with redundant employer, but stretch all the way through some of the largest companies, the government and the Wall Street.
Wall Street is probably the most well-known financial district in the world. As one can imagine, a district like this has faced and recovered from many hits, the biggest being the Wall Street crash in 1929. It stands to reason, therefore, that there are preparations and precautions in place to prevent this sort of wide-scale panic from happening. The recession that began in 2007 affected the entire world, but many sources claim that New York is the epicenter of this disaster. The physical effect of this disaster was invisible to begin with, but the damage was colossal. The stability and growth of the city are heavily dependent on the economy and technology, and this blow to the economy left New York in ruins. Homes and businesses were abandoned by owners who could not keep up with payments, and a tense atmosphere hung all around the city, infecting everyone with panic. The amount of deaths sustained because of this was unprecedented. 4,750 more lives were taken due to suicide between 2007 and 2009, making suicide rates 4 times the average. In the aftermath of this, there was a story of a wealthy man who worked on Wall Street, who, after losing all his money in one day, went home, killed his wife and 2 children, before burning his home and taking his own life. The text, The New Ruins of Great Britain, discusses the importance of the relationship between politics, the economy, and the stability of society. The recession made visible this symbiotic relationship, showing that if one of these fails, the whole society fails, and recovery becomes very difficult. The text also discusses how the government uses short-term solutions, such as lowering interest rates to help people buy homes, without looking at the long-term consequences. The original accident discusses the process of disasters and over-reliance on technology. This is appropriate in both case studies, as there was no or limited protocol in the event of technological malfunction in the case of Fukushima. In the case of New York, it was too much trust in a flawed system. In both, it is concluded that the government is responsible for this. Both nuclear power and the economy are predominantly dependent on political movements.
A similar theme throughout each text was comparison and links between politics, economy, and human input. Greed and trickery, however, are the true underlying themes, whether it be between the bank and the individual, or whether it be between the government trying to save money through generating green energy. The use of green energy is very misleading, as it makes many believe it was a positive solution to their life problems, when actually it was putting more people at danger. New York's sly trickery into making people believe in their low housing scheme was to gain trust and power, but also to fill their greed. Long problems were not taken into consideration when either were instated.
When comparing these two cities, Tokyo and New York are both world's leading cities. Tokyo is more about technology, automobiles, electronics, furniture and textiles, whereas economy of New York City is dependent on finance, banks, ICT and manufacturing sectors. The both cities are about economy and making profit out of what they do best. They're both world's finance centres, which means that if any disaster happen in these two cities, it will affect the world, not just the cities itself. Architecturally, the cities are differently organised, as in New York they don't destroy anything and just build on top, whereas in Tokyo they destroy before they build anything else on top. Since one city is better than the other in some sense, it will have different effects on different issues. For example, if the company Sony goes down in Tokyo and you have a PlayStation, it will affect you, the shops, as well as the companies, and would be a disaster worldwide. Interestingly, it is more expensive to live in Tokyo than in New York because of lack of land, which means both cities have their ups and downs. Both cities, as both cities are about making money out of what they do best, one would say that Tokyo is wealthier than New York in terms of money. In fact, it is the richest city in the world, whereas New York is the second richest in the world. Both cities are very well organized in terms of travel, as both have trains, subways. So if anything happens to the cities, it will cause a disaster and slow things down. Both cities have 500 and over different companies in their cities, and most of them are global, which means that the world does rely on both of these cities. Shockingly, both cities have had strong presidents to learn from and prepare from. The Wall Street crash should have always been in back of the government, bankers and employees' minds. It was impossible for this to happen again, but it was avoidable, which is the point we are trying to get to you guys.
Okay, Fukushima had one of the biggest mistakes the world has seen to learn from, yet they used this risky strategy to save on space and create greater output of power. They knew that safety would be the number one factor in this, yet they chose to ignore it. It would have been risky anywhere in the world, but especially in Japan, considering the high risks of tsunamis and earthquakes. The 2012 Prime Minister's policy stated that Japan would be nuclear free by 2030. However, a recent election put the Liberal Democrats in power, and all of the mayors in the major cities hosting the power plants decided that a restart would be the best idea because it would save the country £4 trillion a year. This provoked a march of over 30,000 citizens with a petition of over 8 million signatures. However, this was ignored, and within the next few years, the 48 power plants will be restarted if they pass safety tests. However, most of them are in high earthquake zones, so it's again risking safety.
The silver lining is that both cities and the entire world should be able to learn from these events and make a full recovery. New York should be able to recover more quickly due to its ties with the global economy, which is improving. There is nothing to say that these events will never occur again, but the world should be more prepared for these situations. The future of Japan, however, seems quite grim due to the fact that the government is stubborn in wanting to reopen most of the nuclear power plants. This, put with a high probability of earthquakes and tsunamis, makes the future unpredictable. The government should not take their responsibility lightly and take more care when planning ahead.
Virilio would see Fukushima disaster as a great example to back up his theory of where technology is advancing excessively. But this case is more complex than that, as this particular disaster stemmed from a natural disaster, rather than one within itself. He also states that the disaster would not be the meltdown of the power plants itself. This is the accident, the original accident. It is the catalyst of time and human response that over time that causes the disaster. It is down to us to find a solution to life's surprises. Our reliance on new technology is what will destroy us. There are enough precedents of high factor earthquakes in this area to know that this will be inevitable. and New York will forever be on the peripheral of a crash unless the government ideas are changed.